The Suicidal State in Somalia. The Rise and Fall of the Siad Barre Regime, 1969 to 1991. Written by Mohammed Haji Ingiris. Introduction. The Rise and Fall of a Dictatorship.
Somalia's post-colonial experience was shaped by a complex mix of hope, betrayal, and political turmoil. After gaining independence, the country embarked on a path toward national unity and development. But internal struggles, Cold War geopolitics, and deep-seated clan rivalries soon disrupted this vision. The most defining period in Somalia's modern history was the rule of Siad Barre, who seized power in 1969, promising to modernize the country under a socialist framework. His rule, which began with ambitious reforms and centralized control, eventually turned into an authoritarian nightmare marked by repression, military adventurism, and clan-based violence. Barre's government not only failed to achieve stability, but actively contributed to the collapse of the Somali state. His brutal tactics, economic mismanagement, and divisive policies led to growing internal resistance, culminating in his overthrow in 1991. However, his departure did not bring peace. Instead, Somalia descended into a prolonged state of civil war, political fragmentation, and lawlessness, turning the country into one of the most well-known cases of state failure in modern history. Understanding the rise and fall of Siad Barre is crucial to understanding why Somalia collapsed and why it continues to struggle with instability today. In this book summary, we will be delving into the trajectory of Barre's rule, his early promises, his shift toward dictatorship, the consequences of his policies, and the lasting impact of his regime on Somalia's present and future.
Siad Barre's rise to power. A promising start.
The overthrow of Somalia's civilian government in 1969 marked the beginning of Siad Barre's reign. As a military leader, he justified the coup by arguing that Somalia needed a strong, centralized government to overcome corruption, inefficiency, and tribal divisions. The new administration, led by the Supreme Revolutionary Council, SRC, abolished political parties and suspended the constitution, presenting itself as a force for national unity. Under the banner of scientific socialism, Barre aligned Somalia with the Soviet Union and adopted policies aimed at modernizing the economy and consolidating state control. His government launched literacy campaigns, infrastructure projects, and land reforms, all intended to reduce clan influence and strengthen nationalism. These early efforts earned him both domestic support and international recognition as a progressive African leader. However, behind the rhetoric of unity and development, Barre was consolidating power through repression and control. Dissent was suppressed, political opponents were silenced, and the government's grip on the country tightened. His early successes masked deeper structural problems that would later erupt into mass resistance and civil war.
The Ogaden War. A costly miscalculation.
One of the most pivotal moments of Barre's rule was Somalia's involvement in the Ogaden War, 1977 to 1978. Driven by nationalist ambitions, Barre sought to unite all ethnic Somalis under one flag by invading Ethiopia's Ogaden region, claiming it as historically Somaliland. Initially, the Somali military made rapid gains, but Ethiopia, with massive military support from the Soviet Union and Cuba, reversed these advances, forcing Somalia into a humiliating defeat. This war marked a major turning point. Somalia's loss strained its resources and led to a massive refugee crisis, as thousands of Somalis from the Ogaden region fled into Somalia. Worse still, Barre's decision to go to war had alienated the Soviet Union, which chose to back Ethiopia instead. Left without a key ally, Somalia turned to the United States for military and financial support, marking a shift in Cold War alliances. The war not only weakened Somalia's economy, but also damaged Barre's credibility. Many Somalis began to question his leadership, and opposition movements gained momentum. In response, Barre became increasingly authoritarian, relying on repression, surveillance, and targeted violence to maintain control.
The rise of clan-based politics.
Despite his early claims of promoting Somali unity, Barre increasingly relied on clan favoritism to maintain power. His government became dominated by members of his Marhan clan, while other clans, particularly the Isaaq, Hawiye, and Rahan Wain, were systematically marginalized. As grievances grew, armed opposition groups formed to challenge Barre's rule. Among them, the Somali National Movement, SNM, in the north, and the United Somali Congress, USC, in the south, emerged as major threats. These groups represented clans that had been excluded from power and sought to overthrow Barre's government. Rather than addressing the root causes of discontent, Barre responded with brutal crackdowns, including the mass killing of civilians. The worst of these atrocities took place in Hargeisa in 1988, when government forces bombed the city, killing thousands and displacing many more. These actions deepened clan divisions and solidified opposition to Barre's rule, making reconciliation increasingly impossible.
The collapse of the regime.
By the late 1980s, Somalia was in freefall. The economy had crumbled, public trust in the government had vanished, and armed factions were advancing on Mogadishu. What had once been a centralized state was now fragmenting into warlord-controlled territories and independent resistance movements. The opposition, led by the USC and other rebel factions, finally overthrew Barre in January 1991, forcing him into exile. However, rather than bringing stability, his removal unleashed a new wave of violence. With no clear successor, Mogadishu became a battlefield as rival factions fought for control. The central government collapsed entirely, leaving Somalia without a functioning state. The fall of Barre was not just the end of a dictatorship, it was the beginning of a new era of statelessness, prolonged conflict, and humanitarian catastrophe.
The aftermath. A nation in chaos.
Barre's departure did not bring peace. Instead, Somalia became a warlord-dominated battleground, where different factions fought over resources, territory, and power. Clan rivalries deepened, with each faction seeking dominance over others. This anarchy led to mass displacement, famine, and an international humanitarian crisis. In the absence of a government, different regions took different paths. Somaliland declared independence, establishing its own administration, while Puntland functioned as an autonomous state. Meanwhile, the rest of Somalia descended into further conflict, creating the conditions for the rise of Islamist groups like Al-Shabaab, which capitalized on the chaos to gain influence. Foreign interventions, including United Nations peacekeeping missions, US military operations, and African Union efforts, struggled to restore stability. Without a central authority, these interventions often failed to create lasting peace, instead further entrenching Somalia's dependence on external forces.
Lessons from the Siad Barre era.
The legacy of Barre's rule provides critical lessons on the dangers of authoritarianism, unchecked power, and clan-based governance. His early promises of modernization were overshadowed by military aggression, economic mismanagement, and human rights violations, which ultimately led to the destruction of the Somali state. His reliance on foreign alliances, first with the Soviet Union and later with the United States, left Somalia vulnerable to shifting global politics. The brutal suppression of opposition movements radicalized resistance groups, making civil war and state collapse inevitable. Any effort to rebuild Somalia must recognize these historical mistakes. Sustainable peace can only be achieved through inclusive governance, fair power sharing, and economic stability. Without addressing past grievances and ensuring representation for all Somali communities, the risk of repeating history remains high.
Conclusion. the long shadow of a dictatorship.
Siad Barre's rule remains one of the most defining chapters in Somalia's modern history. His rise and fall shaped the country's political landscape, setting the stage for decades of conflict and instability. While Somalia has made progress in rebuilding governance structures, the scars of his regime continue to influence political dynamics today. Understanding Barre's rule is essential for understanding why Somalia collapsed and how it can move forward. The challenge is not just to establish a government, but to build a system that is resilient, just and inclusive, ensuring that Somalia never again experiences the catastrophic downfall that marked the end of Barre's era. The road to stability remains uncertain, but by learning from the past, Somalia can still forge a path toward lasting peace.
Thanks for listening. Did you enjoy this book summary? Got ideas on how we can make it even better? Drop us a quick note. We're always listening and learning from you.